The second Chinese dynasty that we're going to focus on is the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty represents an ethnic Chinese dynasty that pushes out the Mongol dynasty founded by Kublai Khan, and probably the piece that's most associated with this dynasty is the Forbidden City. This is actually obviously a series of pieces. It's a large architectural conglomeration or city, but this is also probably one of the most famous pieces of Chinese art from any time period. Originally, the Ming Dynasty had its capital city in Nanjing, but later moved it back to Beijing, which is also the modern capital. And the Forbidden City served as the home of the emperor. We can see the emperor's palace there in the center of this photograph. The Forbidden City is a completely planned and designed urban center. Originally, it was a series of 3 nested walled cities. And each of these cities really circled around the emperor, or the son of heaven, who was the central point, the linchpin of the whole dynasty. The plan and layout of the city and the buildings within it are designed according to geomancy, which is aligning buildings and structures with the cardinal directions. Kind of the most famous example you might be familiar with of this that we kind of talk about or discuss in Western culture is feng shui, putting objects in certain locations for good luck or to encourage those ideas. And then there's also strong influence of numerology here. What's more interesting to art historians, though, is the way in which the architecture really reflects some of the cultural values of the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty was an incredibly formal and rules-driven, etiquette-driven period in Chinese history. That's true of significant portions of Chinese history, especially as it surrounds the royal court. But in the case of the Ming Dynasty, we can see that in their architecture as well. Even in an aerial photograph like this, we can see, for instance, that there's a series of gates that leads into the palace of the emperor, and there's 5 doorways on the outer gates, but as we get further in, there's 3 doorways. And the idea here is that the center doorway is reserved for the emperor, but you should know your social status. Where do you rank compared to other people? Which doorway do you go through? Another feature that we can see even in this aerial photograph are these long open courtyards. And this kind of a long open courtyard forces social interaction. And this is a period when you're thinking about, where am I in the social hierarchy? So just like with those gates, these social interactions are designed to keep your brain involved in thinking about the social hierarchy. Where do you compare to your friends? How can you move up if you're an ambitious person? And the part of the idea, whether conscious or unconscious, is that if you are thinking about those kinds of social minutiae, that you are in fact not thinking about things like rebelling against the emperor. Like in the Yuan dynasty, we see many of the artists of the Ming dynasty are centered at the royal court. And mostly court artists do the kinds of things we associate with court artists, not only in China, but really around the world. They document the appearances of important people, the emperor, his family, important courtiers, and they document important events or historical things that happen. However, court artists in the Ming Dynasty also painted a small number of paintings which were designed to really reinforce this public sentiment or these ideas of the Ming Dynasty. And one of the things the Ming Dynasty is very worried about is a rebellion. This makes logical sense. This is a dynasty that has pushed out a rebellion to take its place on the throne. But pieces like this really show the depths to which rebellion was a deep-seated fear in the Ming Dynasty. This painting features Guan Yu, and Guan Yu is both a historical figure. We think he was a real person who actually lived, but most of the stories and ideas about him have some element of exaggeration. He's kind of a mythological figure as well as a historical figure. And what we see here is that he is defeating a rebellion. He's capturing the rebellious General Pang Di. And the bias against rebellion, the anti-rebellion bias, could not be more clear in this painting. Not only is there a use of hierarchical scale, Guan Yu and his officers are much larger than the captured general, but their clothing is elaborate and decorative. It's painted in color, which is relatively rare in Chinese art. These colors are made from mineral pigments, which were very expensive, and that gives us a clue about this painting coming from the royal court and being an expensive luxury item. But if we look at General Pang Di in that bottom right corner, he's not just captured, he's being utterly humiliated. His clothing is not just less decorative than Guan Yu and his officers, but it's entirely missing. He's been stripped down to just a loincloth. He's not just captured and tied up, but he's in a position of utter submission. He's bound with his elbows behind the stake, tied at the wrists, and even his hair is being bound to the stake. His legs are being stretched out and his ankles are being staked to the ground. So there's a position of utter submission and utter humiliation, not just a kind of ordinary capture. So ultimately, pictures like this not only tell us about the kind of market for expensive luxury goods in the Ming Dynasty, they, like the Forbidden City, tell us about the fears and cultural values of the Ming Dynasty in China.